This webinar is brought to you by Evaluate, the evaluation hub for the Advanced Technological Program. Evaluate works towards a community in which evaluation is valued, systematic, and used to improve the education of technicians in high-tech fields. We do this through engaging project leaders and evaluators with information, expertise, and tools to advance high-quality evaluation. The slides from this webinar are already on Evaluate's website. You can also download them by following the link on the right-hand side of your screen, and the recording will be available within a couple of days, and that will be emailed right to you. I'm Samantha Hooker. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Brianna Hook Singletary and Megan Lopez will be our presenters today. They're both Senior Research Associates with Evaluate, which is located at the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University. We'd also like to recognize those who've worked behind the scenes to help bring this webinar to you today, including Maureen Green, who I mentioned is with us in the chat for technical support, Lissa Betcho, and Jay Hyde. We also want to thank our community reviewer, Candia Mann, for their input in making this webinar. This webinar is designed for individuals who are funded by NSF's Advanced Technological Education Program, or ATE for short. The ATE program is focused on improving technician education, mainly through two-year colleges. It funds projects in high-tech areas like advanced manufacturing, engineering, IT, nanotechnologies, and more. Before we get started, I do want to point out that the views expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and don't necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation. And now I'll go ahead and pass it over to Megan.
All right. Thanks so much, Samantha. My colleague Brianna and I are so excited to be here presenting together. As Samantha said, I'm Megan Lopez, and I'm here to get us started on our webinar, Communicating What Matters. In our short time together today, we're going to cover 4 key areas. We'll start with an overview of outcomes and impact, what they mean and why we focus our projects around them, and when we should think about them. Next, we'll talk about developing meaningful outcomes that reflect your project's goals and priorities. From there, we'll move into measuring and demonstrating impact, looking at ways to show that your work is making a difference. Finally, we'll close with strategies for communicating outcomes and impact to different audiences in ways that resonate. We'll have 2 breaks for questions, one in the middle and one at the end, but please feel free to drop your questions into the chat box as they come up at any time. Samantha and Maureen will be keeping an eye out and will help bring those questions into the discussion. We're going to go ahead and start by talking about the value of evaluating outcomes and impacts in an ATE grant. But if you're not here with ATE, that's okay. This information has a lot of applicability across any project setting. But before we do this, I want to get you thinking about your project plan. If I were to ask you to share about your AT project in one sentence, what would you say? I'm going to give you a moment to think about this or write it down. And if you're willing to share, please put it in the chat. So, describing your project in one sentence. All right. And if this felt challenging to do, we totally get it. There are so many important things that could be said about any single project. That's why today we're going to talk about how clarifying our outcomes and impact can strengthen all aspects of your project. From Evaluate, it says Evaluate enhances the evaluation capacity of ATEPIs and evaluators in the NSF ATE program. That is an awesome, really clear, concise sentence. And I can also tell you from being on the Evaluate side that it only captures one, that I mean, there's so much we could be saying about Evaluate. So thanks for giving that example. So let's illustrate this with the classic idea of an elevator pitch. Let's imagine it's Wednesday morning and you're at work waiting for the elevator to come alongside your colleagues. And one of your colleagues says to you, "Congrats on getting that ATE grant. I've heard a bit about it, but what's it all about? To respond, you start with, thank you. We're excited to create new hands on lab opportunities for our students. As you get in the elevator, you say, we anticipate that 40 students will utilize the lab each semester. And if you end there, your colleagues might respond with, that's cool. It's definitely an interesting point, but it doesn't say a lot about what your project is all about. So let's back it up a little bit. We know that you didn't do all of that work to write an AT grant proposal, get funding, and get everyone at your institution and surrounded industries involved to end your story with the number of students that will be served. No, we know that you spent time crafting a strong project idea because you saw an opportunity to better meet the needs of students, educators, or industry partners. You saw that larger need within the technological education space that by implementing your planned project can better serve your communities and even society as a whole. So, with that, let's tell the story a little bit differently. So, we're back at the elevator, and your colleague wants to know about your new AT grant. This time, you say, we developed this project in response to local industry demand for technicians who can adapt to new technologies and keep the region's manufacturing sector competitive. Our new lab opportunities will build students' skills and confidence with the latest tools, preparing them to meet industry needs. Now, your colleagues are extra excited about what you've shared and can see the value of your new work project on students and the surrounding industries. So, when we talk about measuring impact, we're not just talking about counting how many students participated or which of your planned activities were completed. Instead, we're really asking, how does your project contribute to immediate or broader changes, whether those changes are in individuals, education, the workforce, your larger community, or society as a whole? That word contribute is really important here. Projects like yours don't cause impact all on their own, but they play a critical role in making those larger changes possible. But let's look at a couple examples of the immediate results of your AT grant might result in or the broader changes that your AT project might contribute to. So if we start by looking at how an ATE project might contribute to changes in individuals, we might think about changes in participation rates, so hopefully increasing participation rates thanks to your AT grant, or maybe improved retention rates. These are going to be more immediate results that we can track within our grant window. Longer term, we hope that an AT grant might lead to a growing number of graduates who experience upward mobility throughout their careers. We won't know this within your grant window, but theoretically, our work might contribute to these changes. Let's think about another group. In industry, we immediately might be able to measure changes in number of internships filled and changes in onboarding time for new hires. So, hopefully, a reduction in onboarding time. Longer term, we hope that this will contribute to a thriving economy within the region where these industries are operating. So, when should we be thinking about impact within our project? To answer this question, let's think of a typical project cycle where we start by developing and writing up a proposal or project plan, then do all that work to actually get started on our project. As we move into implementing our project, we'll likely have regular planning meetings and do some annual reporting. And finally, we'll likely work to close out our project as it eventually sunsets. So, the answer to when we should start thinking about impact is truly across all phases of your project cycle. In the planning and proposal writing phases, we think about impact by aligning planned activities to the changes you hope to make, aligning them to the need that inspired them, and ensuring that outcomes have the potential to contribute to broader changes. As we get started on our project, our mid implementation, and are doing our annual reporting, We think about impact by measuring and monitoring progress towards intended outcomes for completed or in progress activities, and considering if changes made to project activities still align with the intended outcomes and impact. Finally, as our project closes out, we think about impact by determining if the project's completed activities achieved the intended results and by identifying how those results address the need that motivated your project at the start. We like to consider, how are we better off as a result of this project? All right, so before we get too much further into talking about outcomes and impact, I want to also address some of these key terms that we hear and think about a lot while doing evaluation. Terms like output, short term outcome, midterm outcome, and impact or long term outcome. We bring these up because in a lot of evaluation settings or project planning settings, you might hear or use some of these terms interchangeably. But regardless of how you're thinking of a specific term, it's good to have everyone on the same page about what you mean by outcome or impact in your project context. So we'll start by sharing how we think about each term and specifically identify where they fit in to an ATE project. And to do this, we're going to use a case example. The Tech Skills Advanced Manufacturing Initiative, which is fabricated for this webinar, is an NSF ATE funded project based at Summit Valley Community College. It's designed to strengthen technician training in industrial automation, reaching traditional students, adult learners, and veterans alike. By combining an industry aligned curriculum with hands on labs and work based learning, the project is building the next generation of technicians who are ready to meet evolving manufacturing needs. So here we have Tech Skills Principal Investigator sitting with the project's external evaluator. The PI says, "We finished our first year of classes with our new industry informed curriculum, hands on labs, and work based learning opportunities. I've been hearing that students and professors are happy with our new activities. I'm eager to hear what you've learned." The evaluator starts by saying 72 students enrolled in the courses with the new curriculum and 30 participated in work based learning. Of those, 35% identified as veterans. All of these are what we would consider outputs. Outputs are the immediate and direct results of a project's activities. Outputs are useful for a lot of reasons, but they don't tell the project's whole story of impact. That's why the PI responds with, "That's great. Was that good? How did these students do?" She's ready to know more. The evaluator continues by saying, "Pre and post tests showed that student knowledge increased with 95% of students showing significant or moderate gains. This is a good example of a short term outcome. The intended results or changes that a project aims to achieve from the project activities. These are the results you can measure within a relatively shorter window of time, such as a semester or at the end of an individual class or activity." The evaluator continues by saying, "Among those who have completed the program, 86% of students passed their industry certification exam." In speaking about what happened directly after the students participated in a project backed course, we are now talking about a midterm outcome, or the changes that result from achieving the short term outcome. In another example of both short and midterm outcomes, the evaluator says, "This year, we started measuring students' confidence. Our initial results found that 87% of students attributed changes in confidence to the program. We believe that this will lead to increased perceptions of readiness to seek employment upon graduation." Finally, the evaluator says, "Together, these show that this project has been highly effective at preparing students with the knowledge, skills, and credentials needed for sustained career success." And the PI responds with, That's wonderful. We are glad to be part of the efforts to ensure that there's a growing number of technicians who are prepared to meet our country's evolving manufacturing needs. These are both examples of impact or long term outcomes. These are the broader changes that result from short and midterm outcomes that address the conditions that made the project necessary. So, I want to pause here for a quick poll question. In your experience or perspective, when planning a project, should you start by identifying project activities and then identify the intended outcomes and impact? Or start with intended impact and work backwards to identify the planned activities? Or is either way fine? You should see a pop up poll on your screen, and I'll give you a moment to think about it before putting in your answers. See, it looks like we have some answers coming in. A lot of people think start with impact and work backwards. Start with activities and work forward. Someone says either way is fine. All right. Well, the answer is it depends. There is so much information and contextual factors that go into project planning that it might make the most sense for some to plan out activities and work towards identifying impact, whereas others might start the other way around. Whichever way you go, a good quality check is to ensure that your planned activities logically link to your short term outcomes, which logically link to the potential to contribute to the identified impact or broader changes you hope to achieve. So, thanks to everyone for participating in that. So, now that we've clarified terminology, let's talk briefly about three strategies to help you identifying meaningful outcomes to your project. Specifically, we're going to talk about aligning outcomes and impact with your AT proposal, aligning outcomes with the NSF solicitation and AT priorities, and aligning outcomes with industry specific standards or frameworks. Starting with our first strategy, your AT proposal is filled with so much information that translates into outputs, outcomes, and impacts. For example, your proposed project activities likely have outputs associated with them. The goals and objectives you identify in a proposal will likely align to your project's midterm outcomes and short term outcomes. And finally, an AT proposal specifically asks you to identify the broader impacts of your work. In another grant setting, they might ask about the greater significance of that work. These, of course, align to our long term impacts. What do we hope to achieve because of our proposed activities? And while it might seem obvious to go back and look at your AT proposal, it can be a common pitfall to identify outcomes and intended impact that don't directly map onto planned activities. So, checking back with your proposal can help ensure that your activities and outputs align to your short and midterm outcomes, which align to your intended long term impacts. The next strategy is to align your outcomes with NSF's AT solicitation. You can locate this document on the National Science Foundation's website, and it truly is a treasure trove of outcomes and impact that NSF have already identified as important priorities by project type. For example, in this section that provides guidance for proposals looking to do program development and improvement, they identify outputs such as aligning education with modern practices that ensure an increased number of students are served. They go on to identify a couple of short term outcomes, such as ensuring that these students have enhanced STEM theoretical understanding and enhanced technical skills and competencies when entering the high performance workplace. Our third strategy is to align outcomes with industry specific standards or frameworks. We recommend looking into career and technical education standards, industry specific frameworks, STEM education frameworks, or workforce force readiness frameworks. So let's bring these three strategies to life using our Tech Skills Advanced Manufacturing Initiative example. For our first strategy, our PI looks back to their AT proposal. The broader impact section highlights their long term goal, which is to strengthen the regional manufacturing workforce by preparing highly skilled technicians who can adapt to rapid technological change. That's their impact statement, the why behind everything that they do. Turning to the AT solicitation, we can see clear alignment to this project with the program development and improvement guidance. Their project outputs include developing new resources and hands on lab experiences. Corresponding short term outcomes focus on enhancing students' STEM understanding and technical competencies for the high performance workplace. These are exactly the kinds of outcomes that NSF emphasizes. Finally, they aligned several outcomes with the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Careers and Studies framework. They're measuring student gains in competency areas such as critical thinking, systems analysis, and problem solving, all essential for technicians working in automated and connected manufacturing environments. Together, these strategies ensure that their outcomes are meaningful, measurable, and connected from proposal to practice to industry. If you need any inspiration based on other projects, check out the ATE Impacts book, which is published annually and covers all active ATE centers and a good handful of ATE projects. This is a great place to read up on what others are doing and measuring. So before I pass it off to Brianna, we're going to pause here with a break for questions, which you can put in the chat at any point. And it looks like we have the link to the ATE Impacts book in the chat as well. They are working on developing the 2025 Impacts book currently. So right now, 2024 is up.
Okay, and we don't have any questions waiting, but let's just give it a minute in case people want to type any in there, and then we can move on.
And while we wait, I saw that RB put a really great sentence of like a one sentence story of what their project does. Our project guides 2-year college students to new career options in high tech advanced manufacturing through updated curriculum with embedded certifications, industry aligned lab equipment, and stronger relationships with industry and K 12 partners, which is a really great summary. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, I think we're probably okay to go ahead and move forward. But again, if any questions come to you as we go on, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll keep an eye on them and then we'll have some extra time for questions at the end.
Sounds good. Thank you, Samantha. So now that we've explored the difference between outcomes and impacts, let's think about some strategies to consider in order to set yourself up to learn about your project story. Many times when evaluators and project teams have conversations about preparing a project to measure outcomes and impacts, it can feel overwhelming, sometimes even a little scary. In the next few slides, we will discuss 5 strategies to think about when planning ahead. The first strategy is to develop clear and measurable evaluation questions. Strong questions guide what data you collect and make sure you're asking about real change, not just about activities. When you're developing evaluation questions, aim for focused questions that are built from 3 key pieces. The first piece is an action verb. This tells you what you're trying to do. Some examples could include verbs like improving or increasing. The second piece is your target population and setting. In other words, who you're serving and where. For example, you might be focused on first-generation college students in STEM programs. The last piece needed for clear and measurable evaluation questions is a long-term outcome or impact that you want to address. This could be around job placement rates or specific automation skills. You just want to make sure that it's something concrete and measurable. The second strategy is to collect baseline data. Ideally, this should be planned before your project begins so you have a clear starting point to measure change against. That's why, when possible, the best time to bring an evaluator on board is during the proposal stage, before the project even launches, so that they can help you think through possible ways to effectively capture baseline data. This timeline shows how baseline data collection may fit into a broader evaluation plan. Notice that it happens right at the start, alongside finalizing the evaluation plan and piloting surveys. That's intentional. Baseline data needs to be collected before the intervention begins, so you can have a clear before picture of the participants, programs, or systems you're trying to influence. For example, before your project starts, you might use existing institutional research data to understand current student enrollment in STEM pathways, or pilot a short survey with students to capture their skills and interests. The takeaway is don't wait until the middle or the end of the project. Bring your evaluator on board and collect baseline data early. Doing so gives you a foundation to measure real change and make a stronger case for your project's impact. Once you've established your baseline, the next step is to continue collecting data at multiple points throughout your project. If you only rely on a beginning and end snapshot, you risk missing the real story of how change happens. By adding regular collection points to your timeline, like follow-up surveys in year one, midpoint surveys and focus groups in year two, and final outcome measures in year three, you can demonstrate growth over time, not just a before and after picture. Collecting data throughout your project doesn't just strengthen your evaluation, it also gives you the chance to make real-time adjustments when the project is still running. In addition to collecting baseline and ongoing data throughout your project's lifecycle, another step in setting yourself up for measuring impact is to document possible alternative explanations. This means paying attention to outside factors that could also explain the changes you're seeing. Things like new state policies, shifts in institutional priorities, other grants, or even local workforce demands. One practical way to do this is through informal conversations with your project team. For example, during regular check-ins or project meetings, you might ask, could anything else have caused the change we're seeing? Or what evidence do we have that links our efforts to the results? By documenting these factors as you go, you create a running record of context. This doesn't weaken your project story, it actually makes it stronger. When you can show that you considered and accounted for other explanations, your claims about attribution and ultimately impact become more credible and compelling. The final strategy is to budget appropriately. Too often, evaluation is underfunded or treated as an afterthought, which makes it difficult to gather the kind of evidence you need to understand your project's impact. When planning your budget, think about three main areas. First, set aside resources for evaluator time and expertise. Having an evaluator engaged throughout your project means you'll have someone helping you frame the right questions, collect meaningful data, and translate findings into stories that resonate with funders, partners, and the broader community. Second, budget for data tools and systems. Survey software, transcription services, or dashboards aren't just technical tools. They're what allows you to capture participant voices, organize results, and show progress in ways that make your impact visible and shareable. Finally, plan for personnel support. Project staff who can help with surveys, follow-ups, or data entry ensure that the evaluation process runs smoothly. This support gives you the consistent information you'll need to illustrate your project's journey and outcomes. By budgeting across these three areas, you're not just covering evaluation logistics, you're laying the groundwork to tell a stronger, clearer story about what your project achieved and the difference it made. So once you've set yourself up to measure impact through baseline data, multiple data points, budgeting, and documenting possible alternative explanations, the next step is sharing what you've learned. To make your project story resonate, you need to think about who your audiences are. Some common examples of audiences for NSF ATE projects include students, faculty, funders and policymakers, and industry partners. Each of these groups cares about different aspects of your projects, so how you frame your outcomes and impacts will vary. Now that we've talked about clarifying who you're talking to and shaping your message, let's take a minute to think about how you currently share your project story. There's a poll on the screen, and let's take a look at the options before we load the poll that describe your team's current approach when sharing your project story. First, we have option A. We focus on reporting required results and general updates. Option B, we highlight achievements to show progress and build interest. And option C, we craft stories and visuals that connect data to what matters most for each audience. Now we're going to launch a poll on your screen so that you can select the option that resonates with you. So I see we have a couple people who mentioned that they report required results and share general updates. Others have selected they highlight achievements to show progress. And quite a few have crafted stories connecting data to each audience. I'll give you a couple more seconds to answer that. All right. Thank you all for sharing. It's always interesting to see the mix of where people are in this process. So if you chose option A, we see that you're focused on accountability and making sure your reporting requirements are met, which is an important foundation. We see that quite a few also selected option B. You're starting to move towards storytelling, connecting your data to real progress and outcomes that matter. And if you landed on option C, you're taking the next step, aligning your data and stories with the needs, priorities, and decisions of your audiences. No matter which one you picked, there's no right or wrong answer. The goal is to start moving from simply sharing updates to communicating outcomes and impact in ways that spark understanding and action. So, how do we do that? It starts with understanding your audience, the people you're trying to reach, and shaping your message around what matters to them. When preparing to share your project story with a specific audience, start by asking, what are their top priorities or concerns? What information would be most relevant or beneficial for them to understand? And how are they likely to use this information when making decisions? Communicating your project story isn't a one size fits all. It's about matching the message to the audience. For example, if you, as the evaluator, wanted to share the Tech Skills Initiative project story with funders and policymakers, you'd want to start by thinking about their priorities and concerns. They're often most interested in alignment with NSF ATE goals, evidence of broader impacts, and whether a program is sustainable beyond the grant. They also want to know how this project contributes to the larger knowledge base around workforce development. So, what information would be most useful for them to understand? In the case of tech skills, you could point to data on student retention, credential attainment, and technician job placement. You could also highlight student success stories that tie directly to industry demand, as well as plans for scaling or sustaining the program after the grant period. Finally, think about how funders and policymakers are likely to use this information when making decisions. They may use your story to shape STEM and workforce policy recommendations, justify continued or increased NSF ATE funding, or inform broader workforce development initiatives. By framing your story in this way, you help policymakers and funders see both the immediate outcomes and long-term impact of your project. When you think about telling your project story, it's really about helping others see the difference your work is making. Let's take a look at some ways you can do that. Once you know your audience and what they value, you can decide the best way to share. Sometimes this means using tools like progress reports, data dashboards, conference posters, or team presentations, things that show progress and keep people informed. Other times, you may want to create higher level products like policy briefs, community presentations, annual reports, or press releases. These formats can reach decision makers, community members, or other institutions who might build on what you've done. Choosing the right approach reinforces your message and makes it easier for people to take action on what you share. No matter the format, a couple of best practices hold true. Frame results with concrete evidence like data points, participant quotes, or skill gains. In this example, you can see how the Tech Skills Initiative used certification data to tell a clear story. Over 3 years, they steadily increased student credentialing, moving from 60% in year one to 85% in year three. That's about a 42% overall improvement. Sharing the numbers this way makes the progress easy to understand and demonstrates growth over time. Additionally, it is important to frame your story with both individual experiences and the broader context, showing patterns or system level improvements. Maria's story highlights how one graduate entered advanced manufacturing, but when you step back, you see the larger picture. 40 graduates are now employed in robotics and precision machine roles. This has helped local employers meet urgent staffing needs, reduce turnover, and plan for growth with more confidence. By connecting a single student's voice with evidence of wider shifts, you help others understand not only the personal difference, but also how the program is strengthening the workforce and supporting the regional economy. That combination makes your story both relatable and compelling. So, as we wrap up, over the course of this webinar, we've explored outcomes and impact, how to think about your audience, and strategies for sharing your project story in clear and meaningful ways. The final section is a brief look at what you can do in your own individual practice, small steps you can take to strengthen how you capture outcomes, frame impact, and communicate what matters in your work. Let's start with your project plan. Take time to revisit how your activities, outcomes, and intended impacts connect. Are the links between what you're doing and what you hope to achieve clear? Sometimes a quick alignment check can reveal gaps or help you refine your focus before your next reporting cycle. Next, pause to think about outcomes and impact at each phase of your project. It's easy to focus on the end, but meaningful evaluation happens throughout. Ask yourself, what outcomes should we see in the short term? What signals of impact might appear later on? Building this kind of reflection into your regular team discussions can keep your project story evolving as your work unfolds. Third, plan intentional data collection points across your project lifecycle. That means not just collecting baseline data, but identifying when and how you'll follow up data or how you'll gather follow up data to show progress and change over time. Think about what information will help you tell a more complete story later and set yourself up to capture it now. Finally, tailor your project story to your audience. Whether you're sharing with funders, educators, or industry partners, think about what matters most to them. What do they care about? And how can your results speak to those interests? When you align your message with your audience's value, your story becomes much more powerful and memorable. These small but intentional actions can make a big difference in how effectively you communicate your project story and help ensure that your work continues to inform, inspire, and create change long after the grant period ends. Now we are going to hand it over to Samantha for our final question break. Sorry.
All right, so we have a question that relates to when you were talking about ways to share your information and shaping your message. So the question is, does this mean that we would draft multiple evaluation reports or include all of these priorities in a single evaluation, which could be quite long? Or do evaluators give various presentations and not submit a written evaluation?
I can go ahead and answer that. Um, I guess a lot of this depends on the project and who you're presenting to, but a lot of times you may create a single evaluation report, and when you're presenting to different audiences, you'll just capture what you need that resonates with that audience. And there's always the evaluation report that one could go back and look at if they want more details about things that maybe you may or may not have included for that specific audience. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have multiple reports, but when presenting that information, it's just important to consider the needs of that audience.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next, what is the difference between an outcome and an evaluation question?
Hmm, I can take that one. Thanks so much, Emily. So, an outcome is right that specific result or impact we're hoping to measure for, and the evaluation question will hopefully ask maybe to the extent that you achieved that outcome or not. So, if you're looking at the outcome being increased in retention rates, your evaluation question might ask, to what extent did these project activities impact student retention, right? And so when you collect data, you'll hopefully answer that question about that outcome.
Okay, thank you. I did have a couple in a chat that was sent directly to me, so I can't display them, but just let me know if you'd like them repeated. The first is, it's not always feasible to measure impact in ETE projects or other grants that have short time frames. Do you have any suggestions that might deal with this resource constraint? How evaluations might deal with this resource constraint?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, right? Because typically in a project lifestyle cycle, right, we are only able to report on more of those short-term impacts, maybe midterm impacts. So again, that's where making sure that there's a logical connection between the short-term income impacts and I'm sorry, short-term outcomes and those larger impacts is really important so that you can draw out, those connections. Sometimes there's research that shows that, if we do this, right, we're more likely to see this long term. But again, like it's okay not to have that specific data, right, to measure those long term impacts. Just be really explicit about the theoretical connection between how you believe your activities and short-term outcomes have the potential to contribute to that larger change.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And in the chat, someone said outputs, outcomes, and impacts are quite the tongue twister. So, yep, I am tripping over those words a little bit, but
Okay, next up, who is the main audience of ATE evaluation reports?
this is a really good question, right? So the main audience for evaluation reports should really depend on your project, right? There are so many audiences, but we like to think of them for one, the audience is you and your team, right? Thinking about those evaluation reports and what it means for your project. How can you guide decision making? How can you make improvements? But then we also love to think about the people that are directly impacted by those evaluation reports. So your students, right? Your industry partners, the professors in your department or your administrators within your university. Those are all really important audiences. But again, an evaluation report should be really useful to you and guiding decision making and project improvement, but then also build transparency and trust and get to celebrate with those who directly benefit. NSF is certainly interested in your evaluation reports, but we've heard from program officers that they really want to see it being something that is most useful to you.
Okay, thank you. All right. How can a focus on project impacts make evaluation findings more meaningful to ATE projects?
Mm, That's a really good question. Um, I really think that understanding the impacts will also understand how it fits into the broader community and the research that you're trying to contribute to. So the focus may not necessarily be explicitly on impacts, if I'm understanding that question right, but more so how this will contribute to broader knowledge. I'm not sure if Megan had anything else to add to that.
I think that a lot about evaluation is about storytelling, right? And so when we say, look at all these great accomplishments, it might feel a bit out of place without that larger so what and why question. And I think that's where impacts play a really big role. If we were to, like, let's say, take it to a whole nother example, I'm a runner, so I enjoy running. And I might say, like, oh, I had a really great run today, or I ran 2 miles and I'm really excited about that. And, that's cool, right? But if you kind of put it like, I've been working on this larger training plan, I'm on a health journey, I'm working to get this goal, right? That is a little bit more of a story that tells you a little bit more information about why these short-term activities, these outcomes, are even more meaningful to me.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell us, where does the evaluation report fit into the overall reporting responsibility of the PI?
That is a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Janet. I think that a lot of that may depend on your relationship with your evaluator, what that process may look like. As the PI, a lot of times they are involved with at least um, just looking at evaluation findings and collaborating with the evaluator to ensure that the report is something that is useful to you, as well as the people that it impacts. So it's very important that the PI is involved to some capacity.
Yep. And in the chat, we have written that the evaluators are responsible within the AT context for the development of the evaluation report, and PIs are responsible for uploading the evaluation report with their project annual report to NSF. So that is a requirement from NSF. But beyond that, too, again, there's so much to highlight and celebrate within your evaluation report. So this is where the PI can really select those audiences that they would like to share these results with. And it's really great to follow through with that and make sure that people are aware and connecting with that great work that you're doing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, Alyssa is in the chat. She added one last section to that. Project PIs should respond to evaluation findings in the body of their project annual report to NSF and identifying how their project is changing or adjusting to feedback.
That's great. Yep.
And that was the last of our questions. So we just have a couple of slides left, and we'll go ahead and move forward with that. Okay, so we hope that you'll connect with us. Evaluate is on LinkedIn. We have the bit.ly and the QR code there. If you're not familiar with our website, it could probably be a pretty good trove of information for you as you move forward with your evaluation and your projects. And we have the QR code and the URL there. So hopefully you'll have a chance to connect with us on those sites. And lastly, this probably doesn't surprise you, but we are big fans of evaluation. So we would really love to hear how we did. We're always open to your outcome and feedback so that we can continue improving our offerings in the future. You have a link that should have popped up on your screen that you can click on to give us feedback and a survey about this webinar. And it will also be included in the follow up email with the recording and resources. So thank you all for joining us today. The direct link to the feedback survey is also in the chat, just in case you have any issues with the action button over there. So we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you all.